I cycled the Continental Divide in 2014, hence the notes, because my memory isn't that good. And I haven't done a PowerPoint presentation because my computer died before Christmas and I've only just got it back. So it's kind of just slides taken from lots of photographs. So in 2014, I was wrecking the lamb up in Loch Carron and managed in the snow for 3 days and managed to rupture a ligament in my foot. And because it was freezing cold, I didn't realise I'd ruptured the ligament in my foot, so carried on in the snow with frozen feet for a few days, and it wasn't until I came back down south that I realised I had a problem. So that's why in 2014 I decided to do the Continental Divide, because I wasn't running, I could cycle, so I was doing a lot of cycling, and it was the Commonwealth Games and I was working there as a volunteer. So after the Commie Games, I headed off to Canada with a friend to do the Continental Divide, and I arrived in Banff. It starts in Banff and goes all the way from Banff to the New Mexican or American-Mexico border to a place called Antelope Wells, which is approximately 2,800 miles. And it's the actual route, 80% of it is on forest roads owned by the Bureau of Land Management in America. Another 10% is on single track and private four-wheel drives, and the remaining 10% is on roads. So you've got an awful lot of miles on gravel track and rough stuff. And I arrived in Canada a few days before my cycling buddy and basically looked at the Rocky Mountains and played at being a tourist, which I'm really glad I did, because when it came to the cycle, Scottish weather appeared and I didn't see the Rocky Mountains. So there's very, very few pictures of Canada because it wasn't worth taking any. So the cycle starts in Banff and it follows the watershed down the Rocky Mountains. So the water on the west side drains to the Pacific, the water on the east side drains to the Atlantic. And the start of this route is this very stunning hotel, which is, I've completely forgotten the name of the hotel. Thank you. Yeah, so this is where the Banff National Park headquarters are. So we started here on the 19th of August, and we started late afternoon because basically we needed new pedals for the bike. You can't do this route without an accurate mileometer on your bike or odometer, and back when we did it, fine, people had Strava, smartphones, etc., but we went for the good old magnet on the wheel to accurately measure the distances. And that's because I don't have a smartphone, but Anna did. But the problem was, you're going miles and miles, days and days without an electricity supply. So how do you recharge your phone every night? So we calibrated the mileometer, odometer, and set off in the afternoon from the Springs Hotel. And this is Spray Lakes. And you can see the first afternoon, everything's fine. We get a view. And the first campground, we didn't stop here for the night, but we stopped at the campground, chatted to the warden, and he said, "Where are you from?" Anna's from the Lake District. "Where are you from?" "I live in Scotland." "Oh, I met a guy doing this route, 3 or 4 years ago." And it was Phil Williams, who lives in Stirling, who's one of the Central Athletics runners. So it's like small world. One of the first people you meet has met somebody that's done exactly the same cycling route. So a big issue, obviously, in the Rocky Mountains is bears. And so we had lots of kit, and we took like a Lomo waterproof bag, what you'd have kayaking, and a rope. And the idea was to chuck the bag of food, deodorant, toothpaste, etc., over a tree every night. But it's not as easy as they claim it to be. Try chucking a bag full of food over a branch that's high enough and tying it up. So in the end, we just dumped our bag of food, 400 metres away from the campsite or something. So if the bears were going to steal it, they weren't going to kill us. This is the first bit of wildlife we saw, which is probably moose poo or something. It's massive. And there's lots of that. And this is, the general view you get of the Rockies when we're cycling parallel to the lake. And the first few days, you're going along the lake and you go over the first pass, which is the Elk Pass. And it's only about 600 feet. And it's quite interesting because for us to get over the pass, it was 9.4 kilometres. But if we had driven around, it's over 200 miles to get from A to B, going from the east side to the west side. This is Anna, who I'm cycling with. She's a girl who goes to the Alps racing a lot. So I met Anna in the Alps racing, and she races for a Lakeland club. And she'd done half a season of racing in the Alps and was up to do something different. So she decided to come out with me. But the problem was she didn't have a mountain bike. So she bought the mountain bike, and all the gear. Well, she had all the touring gear because she'd done road touring several times. And the good thing was I was a slightly stronger cyclist than Anna, but she bought a bike with 28-inch wheels and I had your standard 26-inch wheel bike. So it meant we were pretty equal because she could go a wee bit faster than me on the bigger wheels. But in her naivety of mountain biking, first descent, she absolutely legs it down and we get our first puncture of many in the trip. And that was the problem, is when the tracks were rough, if you went too fast and too wild, then your wheels did just puncture. So we learned that, well, I'm not mad on a descent anyway, but we learned that we had to be reasonably sensible to go there. And that's generally the kind of trails that we were cycling on in Canada. And, you can see from the surface that it's pretty wet. And the first place we got to was a place called Elkford, and we were, as in, you're going vast distances without seeing any villages. And the first place we got to, where there was a superstore, we went shopping, bought some food, because food, when you cycle touring, you become absolutely obsessed with food. And stopped there chatting, and a guy came out, and he was the local mayor. He goes, "Oh, you look wet and cold." And we said, "Yeah, we've been in the hills, been cycling, we're carrying on for a few days." And he came back half an hour later and gave us both a scarf of the local village, Elford, which I thought was really nice. He was the mayor, and he'd, found two random cyclists and came back and gave us a nice fleecy scarf to keep warm. And so because the weather was so bad, you have a map, which one of many, and the map gives a description of the route. It's upside down. And it gives you the profile, so you can see where you're going up and down. You follow this route, and it has little stars where at 5 miles you turn left, 5.2 miles you turn right, and it describes all the junctions. And it's really important that you keep tabs, because if you take the wrong turning, you could end up anywhere, because there's miles and miles of tracks in the Rockies, and a lot of them just lead to dead ends and nowhere. And they give you alternatives. So in really bad weather, you can, instead of sticking to the main route, in the Rockies we caught the Fernie alternative, which ended up in this ski resort place, because the weather was so bad, we didn't see the point of getting rain, pushing our bikes, in the mountains when we weren't going to see any scenery. So there's a few places where you can take an easier route if conditions aren't good. And we'd met people, Americans on the trail, who had done the Canadian section several times and had never actually finished it properly because they'd got snowed off, rained off. And in Elkford, the first place that we stopped in, there was a landslip. So we had to follow the road, for 10 miles and miss a part of the route because we couldn't actually access it anyway. So like all things, it's very weather dependent as to whether you complete the correct route or not. Coming down towards America, the scenery opens up and we've got these really nice prairies where there's just dirt tracks and a good view of, there's horses and, just like the ranches that we would imagine this America. After about 280 miles, we reach the American border. And being a cyclist, it's brilliant because you just jump the queue, went straight in, got your passport stamped, and on we go. I was really looking forward to Montana until I got there. And I found that there's not a lot to see in Montana apart from trees. That would be my lasting memory, is there was vast sections where you didn't, we cycled along Swan River where it was just 60 miles of tree and absolutely no view. And you'd go up over the passes and very often there wouldn't be much of a view from the pass apart from trees. So we started off and you head east towards Glacier National Park, and this is where we had our first and last encounter with a grizzly bear. Just cycled round, luckily it was on a descent, and cycled round the corner and there was a grizzly just walking across the track in front of us. And we were like, shit, what do we do? And you had to take bear spray with you, so if you are attacked, you had bear spray in your front pannier bag. But the bear just ambled off into the woods and, because it was downhill, we just legged it down the hill and kept our fingers crossed. But I had a bear bell. To warn the bears, you can have a bell attached to your rucksack, and the Americans and Canadians laugh at you, but personally I wanted to be heard. And Anna, when it was a single track through the thick wood, she would just sing because we were both paranoid that if we, did fight in a bear, we could be eaten for dinner. Right, so we, and then, it's interesting because one side you had all the trees, and then I don't know if that's acid rain or it's probably some dieback disease, but there's, miles and miles, acres of just devastation from disease. And that's the Americans have a lot of wild campsites where you set up in the middle of nowhere, and it's quite strange because a lot of them don't have a water supply, as in a tap. They just have a drop toilet, a table, a barbecue pit, and you just camp there. And they're like $5, $10 a time, so they're really, really cheap. So that's generally, a lot of the campsites we would just be staying in the forest campsites. And after the event, we find out how to identify a grizzly and a brown bear, a black bear, which we didn't see any black bears, but I wouldn't have been frightened of them. So in Montana, it is ranches and mountains. So this stretch here was my probably worst day of cycling ever. It was Swan River, which is going down from the border down towards Ovando, Helena, which is the state capital. And basically that was the only view we saw all day in amongst miles and miles of trees. And it's quite, the forest tracks there, they're quite rough in sections in this area. And I assume in Montana not many people are driving on them. And there's some single track, which was really nice stuff. And this lake, I just took this because this is Holland Lake where we stayed, but some of you probably know there's a race, the Continental Divide, which I think it's in June. People race unsupported down the Continental Divide. And we stopped in this bar by this lake, and the guy was telling us horror stories about how some years the conditions are so bad that everybody gets to this stage and they've all got hypothermia he's got to stoke up his fire and feed them and thaw them out before they carry on. And the record for the Continental Divide as an individual in the race is 16 days, which is absolutely amazing to go, because some of the stuff is really technical and you're pushing your bike for miles. But these guys, a lot of them use cross bikes, whereas we were using mountain bikes because there's a lot of washboard on the road in places, so to use a cross bike would be quite painful. So it's nice scenery in Montana. This was a quirky little place, just a few days into it. And basically this place had a population, I think it's 82. But they dedicate the village I suppose it's more like a monument. We didn't see anybody there, but within it, they've got their traditional store, they've got their jail, which is, from years ago, and they welcome cyclists. So they have these, unfortunately there was no screen, but they have the solar showers that warm up during the day, and you can get a shower when you come into the village at night, and you just camped in the village green beside the jail. But this I don't, unless you've done a cycle tour, you don't appreciate, we're going 3, 4, 5, 6 days with no facilities, no shower, so when you come to somewhere where you can have a cold shower, it's absolutely amazing just to be able to get a wash. And that's all gravel track. And so we went from Ovano across through the mountains, and we came out onto the east side again. And there's a marked difference. On the west, there was more trees, because it's wetter, I assume, and on the east, it was a lot more open. And here, we came across this farmyard, and we met 2 American guys who said, come and stay here. And this rancher had basically built a wee bothy on their land for the use of cyclists who were doing the Continental Divide. She'd stocked the fridge, put cooking utensils, etc., electricity in it, and you could use, there was porridge there for the morning. She just let anybody take what they needed and, have a nice warm fire in the evening. And it's part of a network which some of you have used called Warm Showers, which is now worldwide, whereas you can host a cyclist and I can go aboard and be hosted. And there's people that go to the extreme and provide nice little bothies for you to stay in the night. And in the garden, I don't know if that's a llama or an alpaca, but we met these 2 guys probably about 10 days later, and they'd travelled ultralight and had all the bike packing gear, whereas we were traditional panniers, and they couldn't believe that 2 women were going as quick as them. It definitely damaged their egos a bit. And we did meet a lot of Americans, well, obviously it's in America, a lot of cyclists, that you went from the ones that had the trailer and had everything but their kitchen sink, to the ones that weren't taking stoves, were going extremely lightweight. And some of them were doing it in one stretch like us, and others were just doing, a week or 2 weeks every year until they finished. And after, I haven't got any pictures of this, but this is one of after this you can go to Helena, which is the state capital of Montana, but we decided to miss it out because we had enough food and supplies, and we wanted to get up Lava Mountain, which turned out to be one of the worst stretches of cycling on the route. You go up through fire roads, and then you go on single track, which is all slabby and washed out, and there's absolutely no way, unless you were Danny McCaskill, that you could cycle on this stuff. So it meant it was a very, very hard, long push, lifting the bike and taking the panniers off up the hill, up Lava Mountain. And then we had learned that if you stayed high in the evenings, it was absolutely freezing cold, so you were better to drop down in the valleys. So we decided to descend back down to the valley, and we're descending through the forest tracks, and by this time I'd totally lost where we were. I didn't know if we were in the right place or, which forest trail, because there was a lot more forest trails on the ground than there were on the map. And by luck, or by a miracle, we ended up descending into this place that was a complete dump called Basin at 10 o'clock at night in the complete pitch dark. So that's the view. So this is Basin. So we pitched up next to the RVs, tiny little 2 one-man tents. And in the morning, the RV next to us kind of was a bit surprised that 2 campers were there and invited us into his RV, which was probably as big as my house, and gave us a tour of his RV. And then he said, "Oh, come and meet my mate." So we went to his mate's RV, which was palatial and extremely posh. And this guy gave us his business card and said next time we were in America to get in touch with him, and he'd hire us a 4-wheel drive truck so we could drive down America rather than cycle down America. And they really didn't get it, but it was nice because, he gave us a cup of tea and gave us some breakfast, and because the night before, we'd finished at 10 o'clock at night and probably had a pot noodle between us because we were knackered. And but they have no concept that people would actually want to cycle down America. And so after Basin, we then headed off down the mountains, through forest again towards a place called Butte. And this is just outside Butte, and it's the only moose I saw on the whole trip. He had a garden full of mooses, but Butte, where we're heading for, it's a boom town from the mining industry. So in the 1860s, they were mining gold. In the 70s, they were mining silver. And then in the 1880s, it was copper. So it's got a lot of mining history. And you find all down the Rocky Mountains, there's just disused mines, artifacts from the mining. And and signposts and plaques everywhere telling you about the mining history. And I find it quite strange coming from the UK, where you go to a cathedral and think, wow, that's amazing, that they've got shacks from the late 1800s that, is their history. And they definitely make the most of what history they've got. So after Butte, you can go up a Fleecer Mountain, which is like climbing a Monroe, but we decided we didn't want to push our bikes up for 3,000 feet and push it back down again. So we just went the road section. And this is just, again, the general campsite. And that's my little tent. So I took a single-man tent. Anna took a single-man tent. And we had a water filter because you can't drink the water because of giardia, which gave up the ghost after a few weeks. And I had a SteriPen, which kills all the bugs, so that's really handy. But we ended up at some places, because we couldn't clean the water through the filter, we just used our buff if the water was really dirty, and just drained the water through the buff, and then kept our fingers crossed that the SteriPen would kill any bacteria. I'm sure we drank some really dodgy stuff. And later on, there's vast sections where you can't get any water. So then I had a 5-litre water carrier plus your bottles, and Anna ended up buying juice bottles and tying them to her panniers. So, we had 10, 15 litres between us. And it's a massive weight of water to be carrying on the back of your bike. So kind of these stretches we wanted to get on as quick as possible. So these are now, they're heading south still in Montana, and this is the Beaverhead Mountains, and this here is cowboy country. So this, we just camped by the side of the road. In the night, heard coyotes calling in the hill, and then the next morning we got our first taste of cowboys. We just watched them filling up the cattle. So this is what I was saying about they like to tell people about the history. So we had a lot of signs just telling us there was a freight road back in the 1860s. And we stopped. This is now coming into Idaho, and we stopped in a place called Big Springs, which is 40 miles from Yellowstone National Park. And we decided we didn't want to cycle in Yellowstone, because if you've ever been to Yellowstone, the roads, it's dual as in two carriageways, but they're really narrow, and it's really busy. So as a cyclist, you'd have a lot of congestion. So we ditched the bikes for the day and hired a car and went to Yellowstone Park. I'd been there before, but Anna hadn't, to see the Old Faithful and all the geysers and hot springs, and just generally be tourists for the day. We'd already cycled for 2 weeks at that stage, so that was our first day off. And we were kind of cycling, well, it depended how quick the cycling was, but we were trying to average 60 miles a day. And some days 60 miles can take you 12 hours, other days, 60 miles would take you 6 or 7 hours. So then when the going was quicker, we'd cycle further those days. Unlike Graham, I'm not misorganised, and I didn't have an itinerary. We just had the maps, and we were just heading south. That was my plan. Had a flight to catch, and the plan was if we didn't get there in time, we would have to catch a bus to get to El Paso to fly home. So no itinerary, just keep going. And then when we were leaving Yellowstone, we were cycling on an old railway track that used to take tourists from Oregon to Yellowstone, and it was volcanic rock. And I don't think Anna's tyre was inflated properly, but basically within a few miles we'd worn through the tyre. So luckily both of us were carrying spare tyres. That's the disadvantage of having 2 different size wheels, is we needed 2 sets of tyres. And so we replaced the tyre, carried on, and then it became very apparent that Anna's back wheel had been damaged as well. So we ended up taking a diversion, but unfortunately the maps only tell you the route you're going, and they don't actually show any other big cities in America or big towns. So he just asked a random person, where's there a bike shop? And he gave us directions to a place called Dregs. And we spent hours and hours and hours cycling through cornfields, no houses, no people, looking for this place called Dregs. And we'd run out of water, and it was getting late on. And we stopped at these, I'll call them Zach and, I don't know, an American name. And we stopped at their house. I can't remember what they're called, but they were really, really kind. They gave us water, and they said, why don't you camp in the garden for the night, because it's gone 6, 7 o'clock. Oh, that would be great. So we camped. Yeah, so then we've left Idaho again, and now we're in Wyoming. And Wyoming is windswept with lots and lots of high desert. And here we're aiming for the South Pass City, which it's beautiful scenery because you have very few trees and you can see the mountains in front of you. And there's lots of storms. So although you're in high desert, the rain is basically hitting the ground and then evaporating. But this was really, really windy. That was the thing that I'll remember about Wyoming, is the wind just blows and blows and blows. So we tried putting our tents up at this rest stop, which it was just a toilet stop. And the tents were going to blow down, so we just had our lunch cooked here, or our dinner, and cooked in this shelter. And then I was kind of saying, well, I'll just sleep underneath the table. But Anna had a better idea, and we actually spent the night in the toilets. So both of us had a toilet cubicle, which you see, hand dryer. Actually, that's the toilet roll, but nice drying facilities. A few times, the problem was the lights didn't go out. So the lights were on all night, and a few people did pass in the night, tried to get in. I was in the disabled toilet, Anna was in one cubicle, and there was another one beside her. So they did have a toilet, but not as many as they desired. And so we left, we got to South Pass City, which has an actual quite interesting history. It's another boom or bust town, but in the 90s, some Californian theme park wanted to buy the houses and move it from Wyoming, as in the historic village, move them from Wyoming to the theme park, but the locals are having none of it, so the locals outbid the theme park for their houses, and eventually Wyoming State purchased the houses from the locals. So it's still there, and it's another museum. But this is Atlantic City, which now we're approaching the Grand Basin, which is one of the probably wildest areas that we cycled across because it is so remote. And Atlantic City, they claim to have a population of about 57. And going round it, I probably think that's an overestimation. And here, they said there was a shop, because on the maps it tells you where you can buy food and restock. But unfortunately, there was no shop, if anybody wants to read it. It's another boom town from the mining age. And basically, there was no shop, but there was a woman in I think she was a pottery shop, I can't remember now. But she gave us any bread and stuff, perishables that she had, just so we had enough food to get us on to the next part, which is very kind of her. And just down the road from Atlantic City was where the pioneers were, the people that were, mining. They had the Oregon Mormon trails, and several of the other trails converged for the pony trails. And it says 1850, there was a snowstorm, and 67 people died on the one trail in October through this one snowstorm. And they call the Mormon Oregon Trail the biggest graveyard, or the longest graveyard in America, because there's just tragic stories of families that were killed whilst trying to come across the Great Basin. So the Great Basin is an area which is literally flat. It's 100 miles wide and 50 miles north to south. And basically all the rainwater that falls on it, it doesn't go drain left or right, it just stays there. And they have these lakes which are formed, but the actual input is less than the output. So most of the time the lakes are just dry. So for the 100 miles across this stretch of this basin, you could only get water at this well here, which was a pipe and was designed for the livestock, which was 26 miles into the 100 miles. And then there was another water supply, a reservoir at the end, the far end, and then you had another 60 miles into Orleans, the next big town, to get water. So it's you have to be prepared. If you don't read the map, you're never going to get across places like this, because it's quite warm as well. But we had started off gorgeous, and basically, it's just open plains, so you get really good skyscapes with the clouds and not a lot else to see. We didn't see any wildlife here, and mining artifacts. But we were being chased by a thunderstorm, so it was it's probably the most exhilarating cycle we had, because it was a strong westerly, so we were being pushed across, and then behind us we could see the thunder and lightning, and so back of the mind, should we stop now and take shelter, but there's nowhere to shelter, or should we just carry on? And basically we were lucky that we got across and managed to camp before the thunder hit us. But that's to me, that's what Wyoming is. It's just vast open spaces where there's not a lot there. And now we're coming into Orleans, which is the next town. And it's a big, I haven't got a picture of it, but it's a big crossroads. And a lot of the towns in America I don't like. They're just the grid system. They've just got the supermarkets. They've got houses. They've got no character. There's no center to them. And this place we stopped at, Orleans, was probably the windiest place in America. You couldn't put your tent up because it was so windy. And they had built barricades around the campsite so you could put your tent behind a barrier. And the population of Orleans was something like 10,000 people. and they had 39 churches. But that's what I found in a lot of the places, is they had a disproportionate number of churches for the population there. But I'm assuming they must come from, all over the county to the town to go to church. And Rawlins is where Calamity Jane used to hang out, who was a real person. Then from here, we're at around 7,000 metres in Rawlins, and we climb up to 8,000 to 9,000, and this was some of the best cycling we had. We're now going south towards the Colorado border, and this was, they just regraded the road, but little did we know that, first of all, in America, they have what they call trail angels. So when you're on these big treks, they'll have people that this guy was working on the road, and he always carried water and goodies to give to any riders that he saw. So he stopped and gave us fresh water and had a chat with us, and we met other people that, specifically go out to help the people that are either walking or cycling the Great Divide. And we carried on, and they're now building a new road. So this lovely stretch of track is probably now covered in tarmac, and it was because there was nobody there, probably because they were regrading it, and just rolling up and down, of open vistas for 50 miles, and they're building a nice tarmac road on it. So I don't know where the trail will go now, because I'm sure it will miss that. And then we came off the open landscape, dropped down a bit to Aspen Alley, and so we had aspen trees on either side of us, which a few weeks later would have been an absolutely gorgeous colour. And now we hit the Colorado border, which Colorado is probably the America that I kind of imagine, because that's where I've spent most time when I've been in the States, is in Colorado, which are spectacular hills, trees up so high, but you get more landscapes that we're more used to. And we went into Steamboat Springs, which is a ski resort. And then it was a completely different type of cycling, because suddenly Steamboat Springs is a ski resort. There's a lot more people. So you've got cycle paths, you're cycling on better graded roads, and a lot of single track roads where there's very little traffic. And carried on towards the bigger ski resorts, and this is all very nice, but then we go around the corner and we find at the Utah Pass, which is about 10,000 feet, a massive, massive open cast mine. So that's all dust coming off the mine, and then that's all the slurry or the wastewater, and that it was absolutely massive. But it was how you can go from such beautiful scenery to such desolate scenery. You can only do that in America. It wouldn't be allowed in the UK, hopefully. So this is, now we're in Summit County, which Breckenridge, Frisco, Dillon Reservoir, which is probably places that people, if they've been to Colorado, it's the ski resorts, it's where people go, and it's quite a shock when you've been on some wild remote to come back to civilization and to be following nice twee tarmac cycle routes and supermarket at every street corner and lots of people around. But soon we were headed back over the Continental Divide, over the Boreas Pass, which is where the trains used to go from Como to Gunnison, again for gold mining. And this pass is, they've got a lot of relics again. So now we're getting higher, because this is 11,400 feet. And it's a complete change. We're suddenly going from the beautiful mountains again to the high desert and the big plains. And this is at the top. And we stayed in this place called Como, which you'll see the next picture. It's on a massive plain, and it's named from the Italian miners that you'll never guess lived or came from Lake Como in Italy. And this, it's got a population, they claimed, of about 400 people, but they let you camp by the village hall, and there's an electric socket for powering up your batteries, but there was no water supply, so we went round looking for water, and somebody, kindly gave us some water and invited us in a house, and the house, was a normal house, and then within the diameter of the house, there was a room in the centre of the house. I said, this is a really funny setup, and the lady said, in the winter, it's so windy, its average is over 100-mile-an-hour winds non-stop, that they live in the centre of the house away from any windows because the wind is likely to smash the windows. And she was saying they go days on end where they just live in the small central room, and the cars on the highway will get caught by gusts of wind and blown off the highway. It was a pretty desolate place. And see, that's basically just the vast plains that you got looking from Como south. So now we're going into more plains and following the San Isabel forest, which it's just the same kind of scenery. It's plains, and then as we're coming to Salida, this is one of the prettiest places in Colorado, where coming down into the Salida, you can see on your panoramic view, you've got 15 peaks over 14,000 feet. So there's the Collegiate Peaks, Mount Elbert, which is the highest in Colorado, Mount Massif, and a few of the other ones. And previously, I've been to America when I've been racing and climbed some of these peaks, so it was quite nice to see them at a different perspective. And as you can see, the aspens are changing. And we're there again, we're climbing up to nearly, 10,800 feet, which I'm really sad is every pass that we cross, I always take a picture, but you can see I'm never in the picture. I refuse to be in pictures. And we come down to more plains, and this is more cowboy country. And it's hot during the day. This is what we found really hard, is in the day, it's 80 plus, so it's really hot. But in the night, the temperatures would drop, so it was freezing. So it's really tough on your body, whereas in the day, you're cycling in just your shorts and T-shirt, then in the night, you need your down jacket, your woolly hat, and your sleeping bags aren't warm enough. But this was a very tasteful location. It was the only place we could find where there was some shade to have lunch. So we kind of run a system, we'd have breakfast, cycle a few hours, stop, have a snack, cycle a few more hours, have lunch, then have an afternoon break, because we were just always hungry, basically. So we're coming down the San Isabel forest, and another historic stage route towards Gunnison, and more dereliction. But this is where it comes a bit more like cowboy scenery that you see from the cowboy films. And this is what I was talking about, was washboard roads. Can you see how, like on your sink, you've got the washboard bit with all the dips. When you've got miles and miles of this, it really hurts your forearms. And there were some sections where you couldn't avoid it. A lot of them you could go to the left, go to the right, but you were just continually going, which meant all the screws on your pannier rack would loosen, so we always had to tighten up the screws on the pannier rack. And in other areas, they regraded these. They'd have a big machine that would regrade the road. But the problem was when they regraded the road, it was really soft and your wheels were sinking in. So I never knew which was better, the washboard or the regraded bits. But this was me waiting for Anna, I was a bit bored, but this was around, anybody know what happened on 18th of September in 2014? Scottish referendum. And I was amazed because when we stopped at a cafe, after this section, it was full of rednecks, people hunting, because the hunting season had started, and they were asking us where we came from, and I said Scotland, and they were going, you've just had a referendum. did you vote? You lost. And I was amazed because I thought Americans just cared about America, but we actually met a lot of people that knew that Scotland had had a referendum. So we're coming into South Colorado, whereas this is absolutely beautiful in places, especially this time of year. I'd always wanted to go and see the aspens changing, and we were there late September, so the trees were changing. And as I said, there were lots of rednecks in the hunting season. They're all dressing up in their camouflage gear. Lots of them had guns on their quad bikes, and they were basically hunting elk, deer, whatever they could find. And in this section, we found loads of them. But they were really good with us. And we're coming up to some of the highest passes now, which were 10,000, and this is the highest pass we went over, which is Indiana Pass. And obviously, they don't expect anybody to go there because they couldn't even be bothered to put Indiana Pass there, and it's nearly 12,000 feet. So the climb was from 7,800 feet up to nearly, so you're climbing just over 3,000 feet, but at that altitude, it takes you, on rough tracks as well, it takes you a very long time to climb the 3,000 feet. But coming over this pass, we then hit big mining countries where there's slag heaps, and they're reclaiming a lot of this. But it makes quite a stunning landscape. As you can see that, I really like that picture with the slag heaps in the background and the aspens changing. And we came down and dropped down to what was relatively low here, but it's still about 9,000 feet, to a place called Plantero, which is basically on the New Mexican, Colorado border. And I naively thought once we finished Colorado, we were nearly home, because New Mexico it's a big state, but we'd obviously be going downhill and getting lower. But little did I know that the next 100 miles were all going to be at 9,000 to 10,000 feet. So you're still cycling really, really high. And we came across this narrow gauge railway, and Andy will appreciate this. We actually saw the train going along the railway, which only goes a few times a day, so we were quite lucky to be there in the right time. So now we're in the New Mexican border, and the paths, and it's probably because not as many people. Colorado is a big playground. New Mexico is a lot poorer, and I don't think as many people cycle this stretch or cycle in New Mexico, because you can see there a lot of the paths were washed out, and my skill level does not cycle up that, so a lot of the paths were washed out, and basically, we were pushing our bikes a lot of stretches because the ground was too rough. And this is just we kind of cycled on a big rim while we were at the 9,000 feet, and that's just us on the top looking across at the view. New Mexico turned out to be my favourite state because it was so contrasting. The northern bit was, mountainous and beautiful, and then you got to the cowboy plains. Somebody's clock's going. That's fine. And unfortunately, we were there the end of September, beginning of October, so the rainy season started, which meant this is what we were cycling through. And that picture that popped up from nowhere was supposed to be in front of this. So that, you couldn't cycle through that, because as soon as you started cycling through it, obviously you got clogged up and you had to push. So we spent a lot of time in the northern part of New Mexico having to push our bikes. And there's the tracks like this are fine, but the rainstorms would come from nowhere. So 1 minute it would be dry like that, and the next minute it would be mud again. So we decided when we got so far and could join the road that we would ditch, following the actual official trail, and just try and get to Albuquerque is what I'm calling it. I've absolutely no idea what it's called. On the roads, because it was taking too long, because you can cycle 10 miles an hour, but you can't push your bike 10 miles an hour. And we arrived at Albuquerque, stayed there for the day or the night, and then set off the next day. And unfortunately, we got another mechanical, and we were in a lay-by trying to fix, it was something to do with the brakes, trying to fix Anna's bike, and this person went past, and then an hour later, we're still there. And they kindly phoned up one of the locals who came up with a pickup truck, chucked the bikes in the back of the truck and took us back to the village. But the problem is the nearest cycle shop was in Santa Fe, which was a very long way away. So the next morning, we were in the petrol station trying to work out ways to get to Santa Fe. And there was chatting to the locals, and was told there was a post office bus, and Anna was going to get the post office bus with her bike, and I was going to stop there with the kit. And then an elderly man came up and said, no, you're not going on the bus. The bus driver's been known to rape women in the past, so she's definitely not going to go by herself. So this guy kindly drove us miles to get the bike fixed, and then brought us back so we could start cycling the next day. So we took him out for dinner that night because he more than deserved it. But it's the people you meet. They're just, I think it's because we're two females that people will go out of your way to help you. And we set off the next day, and this is one of the posh restaurants. You can see this is really poor area, and we set off towards a place called Cuba, and it's I don't know what the plants are, but rugged terrain, and it's sand, and we kept getting stuck in sand. So we decided to go, we were supposed to go up around this volcano, but we decided to, after spending a few hours pushing our bikes through deep sand, we decided we'd join the road and go the longer way round. And it's a lovely rolling road, and there was nowhere to camp. And the guys had told us, whatever you do, don't camp by the road, because you might find that, if the poorer people saw you, they would come and, steal your stuff. So we were on this road, and it was getting dark, and it turned out there was a laundromat in the middle of nowhere. And I went in there, and the guy said, camp in here, lock the gates. I guess you'll be safe because nobody can get into the compound at night. So we camped on the gravel in his laundromat, and he gave us, not me personally, but Anna, endless cups of coffee. And then the next morning we carried our way. But there is a real distrust between the white community and the Mexicans that have moved there, because the guy was he was white, and he was saying there's no way you're going to camp wild. If you're going to camp, be well away from the road. So we ended up in Grants, which is, I haven't got a picture of Grants because, again, very run-down town. It's on Route 66, which you probably have all heard of Route 66 in the Grapes of Wrath. That's the road they follow. And so all the high street, all the motels were closed down, really, really run down. Cycled down through the high street, just saw lots and lots of closures, and got to the end of Grants, and there was a Walmart, big supermarket, straight off the freeway. Basically, everybody leaves the freeway, goes to Walmart, and then heads on, which has just killed another American town off. And cycling down from Grants to south, they had these really amazing rock formations, and went past a lava field, which is actually a national park for all the lava rock formations and stuff. It's the El Malpas. And this we were heading due south, and this stretch was just into a headwind. And basically, I think for the next 70 miles, I had my head down, and Anna just sat on my back wheel because, it was just hard work. And as soon as she went in front, I was like, just get behind me, because I'm not sitting on your back wheel. And it's hot. And there you can see here, when we're off the tarmac, again, big stretches of sand. And at the end of this section, it's beautiful hills, is we get to a place called Pie Town, where this mad woman has a house here, which she lets out to anybody doing the Continental Divide on their bikes or walking the Continental Divide can stay in her house for absolutely free. And she stocked her freezer with pizzas, healthy food, no? And you just left a donation and, helped yourself to pizzas. And the following morning, she was pleased to see she had more cyclists staying in her house. We were there with 2 walkers that were both walking it individually. And she was pleased that she had the cyclist, and she wouldn't let us go without taking us on a tour. So we jumped in her car and she took us around the local sites, which was like a mobile phone mast. It wasn't particularly interesting. And again, they had about 30 churches for a population of 20 people. It was a completely, most of the houses in Pie Town are derelict, and it's called Pie Town because it's famous for its pies. But we didn't hang around to have a pie. We headed further south, and we're getting lower and lower, and it's lots of plains, derelict ranches, and here water is a real issue. And we filled up with water in Pie Town, and on the map it says, there's water in 50 miles, and it was supposed to be in a cattle trough, and it was dry. There was a pipe feeding the cattle trough, and there was nothing there. And then the next stretch was massive, and again, it's like, we've got no water. And I think these are supposed to pump the water up. And so we decided, we got to the main road because it crossed a main state road, and there was a church in the middle of nowhere, and the church was open. Churches are very handy, as Graham knows. The church was open, and there was, a toilet, so we filled up with water, and we kind of ummed and ahed, should we carry on today, or shall we stay here? And we ended up camping in the church compound, I would say the church yard, and there was absolutely nobody about. And the next morning, Anna left a little note for the vicar saying, thank you, we used your facilities, filled up with water, and headed down south. But it was if we hadn't have had the church there with water, we would have had to kept on the main road until we could find somebody, a house with water. That's my wildlife picture. We had a picnic in this lovely area here, and I found the locusts there eating our peppers. And now we're in the San Augustine Mountains, and we're starting to get into the Gila National Forest. But you weren't allowed to camp here. We camped in a ranch next door to it that could provide us with water. And this is it was very rough, undulating, cycling up and down, and that was the view through the trees. And then we were heading towards the Gila forest, Gila cliff dwellings, which were off the route, but we'd seen pictures of them and decided that they were worth making the diversion, because we made very few diversions. We did basically follow the route down the Rockies, and it's just houses from 1000 AD that were built in this ravine, which is about 200 feet above the riverbed. And as you can see, it's perfect to keep cool in the hot weather, because this was desert. This was really hot. And the interesting thing is when we were looking around these cave dwellings, I don't know who he is, but I met a guy from 5AC. He came up to me and says, "Is that Angela?" And I looked at him blankly, and he says, "Oh, you won't know me, but I run for 5AC." So you can go anywhere in the world and find a runner that knows you or you know them. So that's the Gila cliff dwellings. And then we stopped in Silver City, which is the last big city before we reach Antelope Wells. Silver City restocked, good few days worth of food, enough water to get us to the enough water stop, and then we were just gradually descending. We're probably down to about 4,000 feet now. And this was the shade we got for our lunch stop. Basically, you're talking hot, and I always had clothes on when I cycled. I wasn't quite as daring as just cycling in my crop top because I'd burn. And basically we hid underneath that tree to get some shade for our lunch. And then we came out onto the road, and the last town before Antelope Wells is a place called Hachita, which I can't pronounce, but it'll be Spanish. And again, it was quite a big town in its heyday, but now it's tiny. There was no shop, hardly any people in the houses. But we met a guy who kindly let us camp in his garden, and his thing was growing pomegranates, and he was going to become the world's supplier of pomegranates. But he let us, the Antelope Wells is another 46 miles from this village, so he let us keep our tents there, and we just cycled down on the road. And it's just straight road, literally, a few corners for 46 miles to get to the Mexican border. And the interesting thing is they were re-tarmacking most of this road. And, you know, in Britain, we do 1 or 2 miles. They were probably doing a 30-mile stretch of tarmacking. And on the way back, we were stopped by the Border Patrol. There's loads of they're really paranoid about Mexican immigrants. This is even 6 years ago, and there were a load of Border Patrol, and they'd found some footprints in the sand at the side of the road, and they wanted to know, had we stopped and camped there the night, or had we, you know, walked across the sand? We're going, no, we've just kept on the road, because they were wanting to find any escaped Mexicans. And that's the finish, Antelope Wells. So that, we were cycling for, I think it was 40 days, it took us to get there, which is a lot slower than 16 days in the race. But kind of when you weigh up the amount of kit that we were taking, not on that day, because obviously I've got no kit there, to what you would take on the race, you can travel a lot quicker, and the bits that we would be pushing through, you could obviously cycle through because you haven't got the weight on your bike. But at Antelope Wells, we met people that were local. There was, in that 42 miles, there were only 46 miles, there were only 2 ranches on either side of the road. And we were having our sandwiches, say a bit of bread and a tomato, and the guy came up to us and said, "Where did you get that tomato?" Because they don't get tomatoes down there. And I just thought it, because from where we camped, it was another 50 miles to the next town. So you're talking vast distances where you can get facilities and, you know, general groceries in America. So basically, we then cycled back up to where we'd camped, and then had to go to, which took us 2 days to get to El Paso, where we flew home. And I stayed with a Jewish rabbi from the Warm Showers website, and they were really, really friendly. And his wife was brilliant, because on the way out, I'd flown, I didn't do much research, but I flew the cheapest ticket, which was KLM, and found out when I got to the airport that I had to pay 250 euros for my bike each way. And as my bike was only 500 quid, it seemed pretty stupid to spend 500 euros getting it to and from America. So what I did is, on the way out, I'd packed everything in the bike box, and I just had my rucksack and everything in the bike box. And the lady at check-in said, "You can go through, you know, I won't charge you the money because you've only got the bike box." And that had happened to a friend, and he said on the way back, they wouldn't let him get his boarding card until he'd paid the full amount. So I was absolutely paranoid that I was going to be charged 500 euros. So I got a massive bag, and I took my bike to pieces, and I left, I think it was the back wheel I left behind, because I couldn't get that in, because I thought, well, buying a new back wheel is cheaper than buying, you know, paying for 500 euros. And it went straight through. Nobody questioned that was a bike in that big bag. And the only thing that broke was the back derailleur, which needed repaired anyway, so that wasn't a big deal. But I still have that bike, so that's good. Yeah, so that's it, basically. I hope it made sense.